So I hope those of you who are new heard that. She went from stage 3 kidney disease. Her kidneys were failing and probably a GFR, I think, in the 40s. And when you get down to like 15, you start thinking it's time for dialysis. And 60, above 60 is normal. Well, she went from the 40s to the 60 over 90 days. It was 3 months, I believe. Yes?
Yes.
Lynn.
I just got my yearly lab work. I've been a type 2 diabetic for 25 years, and my A1C was below the threshold for diabetes, and my cholesterol normalized.
Hey, congratulations to you. Had you been on medicine before you started?
I'm still on metoprolol. So my doctor was quick to tell me that I still have diabetes until metformin, I'm sorry, metformin, until I'm off the metformin and under it for 2 years or something like that. And she was, and some of the
value of 2 years or whatever, you know.
And some of the bluster went out of her urging me to go on a statin, but she still managed to do it. She lowered my target.
Okay.
She just lowered it. She just lowered it. She says, your target is now.
You know, maybe she'll learn, like Scott and I have learned, that deprescribing is actually more fun than prescribing.
She was positive. She ended the session saying, well, keep doing what you're doing because you're getting results. And all I said was whole plant foods, no oil. And she kind of turned away. I want to hear more, but she was positive for the first time in years.
Okay. That's thanks to you. Good job.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Good story. Thanks for sharing that. That's helpful for people who are new to the group to hear that actually there is, you know, hope that they may not have had before. They've tried a number of things in the past and it just hasn't seemed to work. Maybe yo-yo, lose a little weight, gain it all back and more. You lose a little more, starve yourself, try a different diet, this, that, and the other. Nothing seems to work, but this does work for those of us who do it and stay on it. And you know what the cost is? Nothing. For those of you who are in this meeting, has anybody spent money on a fancy prescription or, you know, had to pay someone for a consult or been charged anything? I don't think so. Costs nothing. And in fact, many have told us that they save money on their food bill by actually eating plant-based, healthy foods.
I've had a lot of patients save a lot of money on their insulin. I've had patients that were spending like $300 a month just on their medications, including insulin, and then they don't need them anymore. So they save that money and save lost time at work. They save, you know, co-pays and other health care costs, and there's a cost for all that. And then yeah, if you're eating whole plant foods, unprocessed, the way we teach, it's actually cheaper at the grocery store as well overall. Anyone else have any other comments before I jump in on food label reading tonight?
Well, I think just people have this idea that eating vegetables and fruits and whole grains is expensive, and I don't know. When I look at dairy and meat, it's just ridiculous. You know how expensive they've gotten compared to eating healthy.
Someone told me meat was $13 a pound. I haven't looked at meat prices for literally years. I have no clue. Does anybody know what the price of? Yeah. Dolly?
I've only seen it. I walk right by it, wave, blow it a kiss, keep going. Because we buy the fresh produce now, so
Yeah,
it's saving us a lot of money. Rotisserie chicken today I saw it used to be like almost $7, but it was over $9, almost $10 today.
wow.
Yeah, and
Okay.
salmon was like $16, $17 a pound. When we lived in Alaska 20 years ago, it was $3 a pound.
Wow. Yeah. So beans, rice, potatoes, lentils, quinoa, oatmeal, a lot cheaper than that. So Lisa, nice to have you. Were you able to give any talk today? How did it work out? We're kind of curious about that. You know, we like to keep involved with what your life's doing. Were you able to do anything with that?
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, I just started my rotations at a hospital, and my first one right now is in the inpatient psychiatric ward. So it's a pretty acute setting. There's a lot of security, a lot of protocol, and I was in the occupational therapy room and had the opportunity to talk about nutrition with the patients there. So I made this handout to show you guys. It's very patient friendly, pretty simple. And with Dr. Ross's and Scott's help, I got to put that together and it went really well. I was kind of prepared for some like chaos, but everybody was actually very engaged. And some of these patients can be very difficult to talk to normally, but I surprisingly, some of them, you know, come from shelters or like come from being homeless into our ward. So talking about nutrition, I didn't think that they would be very passionate about it, but someone asked about intermittent fasting, whether they need to take a B12 supplement if they're vegan. So yeah, I think it went really well. We had a paper plate and we cut out food from a magazine so they could kind of make a meal, and it was like the proportion sizes, handfuls, palmful of nuts, that kind of thing. And we did talk a lot about prices and food stamps and access to healthy food, even without refrigeration, without microwaves. So it's a good experience for me too.
So you went in, you went in scared, a little afraid, and you came out feeling successful. Could you show us the chart one more time? It wasn't I didn't have you in full view.
Yeah, I can post it on Facebook too if anyone's interested, but we just talked about what is healthy eating, why is it important? Obviously for them, mental health is a huge motivation, a huge factor. And then
So could you share briefly what is healthy eating? What'd you tell them briefly?
Just to keep it simple, I said that healthy eating means eating a variety of foods that provides nutrients for your body.
Okay, and what were some of those nutrients?
Well, we just talked about vitamins, the protein, carbs, fiber, of course. We didn't go like too in depth about it, but just
You didn't go into legumes or veggies, fruits, or did you
yes.
discuss the categories?
We discussed some examples of each of those types of nutrients. Yeah.
Okay.
How does that compare to the meals that they were being served in the hospital?
That's a great question. They actually have better meals than the cafeteria in my opinion, because they get fruit and there's no fruit in the cafeteria. So they'd get fruit. A lot of them said that was like their favorite part of the meal. They get fruit for snacks as well. You can request vegan diets. There's actually a surprising number of patients who are vegan or requesting a vegan diet.
This is in California now.
Yes,
And the law was passed a couple years ago that it kind of insists that they be offered the plant-based choices. Oregon tried to pass a law, it didn't make it. We may do some more with you next week, but we need to let Scott get on and do the label reading. But Lisa, thank you for sharing that. And we appreciate what you're doing. And for those of you new to the group, Lisa's a third-year medical student now who has been doing counseling for free. If you have an issue that you'd like to talk to her about to help you on your path, she can help you, and she'll consult with us. And that way, you get two opinions for the price of one, which the price is nothing. So how can you beat that? Lisa, thanks. Scott, are you around?
Yeah. So no, any other last questions or comments before I jump in with anybody?
I do.
Okay, Marcia.
I saw this email from Amy. She's from Veg Health,
Yep.
and she had 3 or 4 doctors talk last week. And one of them, I can't remember which one, said, don't believe the front of a label, the front of the jar or can, but to read the back of it. I can't remember all what he said, but.
Well, that's a good segue into what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah.
now.
It is.
All right, let me share my screen here. Assume you can see that.
I think so. I can see it, Scott.
All right, so let me go to the class website and let me expand it here. And so you can, this is the Live Lifestyle Medicine website. And so if you just hover over and click on resources, I'm showing you where the handouts that I'm going to go over tonight are located. So you click on resources, you get this page here. Let me get this out. I don't know if you guys see that or not, that bar. Anyway.
Here,
So
is the bar out of the way?
it is for me. I don't know if it's out of your guys' way.
It's in the lower right-hand corner for me now.
Okay. So you click on handouts from classes right here. You'll get this page here. So I saved them all up on top so I can toggle back and forth pretty easily. So I had it in the weekly email on Sunday. So the 3 that I'm going over tonight are how to read food labels without being tricked, how to read a food label, and the new and improved nutrition facts label key changes. So those are the 3 I'm going to go over here. So we go to the food label, how to read a food label article here, this one. And so the first thing I want to talk about before I go over all these details, and I'm going to say this repeatedly throughout this talk, is that the #1 rule to reading food labels is if it has a label, you probably don't want to eat it for the most part. So that's the very first and very most important rule. So you think about, you go in the produce section, eating fruits, vegetables, beans, intact whole grains, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. Those don't have labels for the most part. There's a few exceptions, like you go to the frozen fruit and the frozen vegetables. You look at the label and it says broccoli, cauliflower. That's the ingredients list: broccoli, cauliflower. So that's one ingredient. So that hardly counts as reading a food label, but that technically is a food label. But it's still good to have this skill set. And a lot of you probably already have some basic understandings of reading labels. But I've taught this to hundreds of patients over the years, and I haven't had one person yet that had many patients that say, well, I know a lot about reading labels, I'm not sure what I'm going to learn here. And then when I was done going over these handouts, oh, wow, there was a lot I learned actually. So, so hopefully you'll feel that way at the end of this as well. And so let me go to the next page here. This is just the front of where the article starts. And I'm not gonna go over this, you know, in word by word. You guys can read this, but I wanna go over the kind of the key components. And just as Marcia said, don't be duped by the claims on the front. So if you are gonna read a label, there's a few skills that you need. And the first, you know, or I guess the second rule would be, first rule is, you know, try not to eat foods with labels. Number two would be just pretty much ignore what's on the front, because the front always has kind of false and misleading claims. And so it's just don't get mesmerized or, you know, misled by what's on the front. So that's the number two rule. Then you look down at the ingredients list, and this is probably some stuff you guys already kind of know. You know, the ingredients lists are from highest used to lowest used in the package. And so looking at those is really important. And you want it to be, you know, 5 ingredients or less. Those are kind of the things to look at the most. If it has, you know, 2 or 3 ingredients that you recognize, but then it looks like a chemistry set the rest of the way, then that's not a good sign. You want to put it back on the shelf. So it actually even says here, scan the first 3 ingredients. And if they're, because that's the largest what you're eating. So if the first 3 ingredients include refined grains or some sort of sugar or some sort of oil, then that's not good. So you want to put that back. So just if it has whole foods, there's the first 3 ingredients, that's a good sign that it's probably pretty healthy. So this is just looking at ingredients. So that specifically. So we'll take this compartment by compartment. So that's probably not too much of a shock there on that. And then the next is watching for serving sizes. And this is really where it gets really tricky. And when I go over the food label changes that actually happened about 3 years ago now, this is a little bit better now. They used to really put really super small, ridiculously small serving sizes on a package, because it makes it look better when you look at the amount of sugar, the amount of fat, amount of calories that are in a food. It's basically in a serving, and so it makes it look better if you make the serving size really small. So a couple of examples, that a can of Coca-Cola is considered 2 servings. So a half a can of Coca-Cola would be a serving, but whoever sits and just drinks a half a can of soda, right? So it just makes it look better. So that was one of the changes that, and I'll go over those in a little bit. They did increase the serving sizes a little bit to a little bit more reasonable, but they're still really amazingly small. And there's one little example I want to give you here with how they can trick you. It kind of pulls together, ignoring what's on the front of the package, and then the ingredients list, and then the serving sizes, how they kind of play that together to kind of deceive us. So you guys all are familiar with like PAM cooking spray or olive oil cooking spray that comes in the bottle. You guys kind of familiar with that, right? That you get at the store. And so I've actually seen them. It'll say 100% fat-free cooking spray. You go, okay, how is it 100% fat-free cooking spray? Because you look at the ingredients list then, and it's olive oil. So it'll say, you know, olive oil cooking spray, 100% fat-free. You're going, well, wait a second, I thought oil is 100% fat. That's all oil is fat. How could it be 100% fat-free? And so what they do as a trick is they make a serving size. And if you look at the serving size on the back, so you look at the ingredients list, it's just olive oil is all it is. And then you look at the the serving size, and what they consider a serving size is 1/4 of a second. A 1/4 of a second of cooking spray is considered a serving. So that would actually be like, I mean, that was probably more than a 1/4 second. That's a serving, a 1/4 of a second. But what do we all do? We go shh on there, right? And the reason they do a 1/4 of a second is because in a 1/4 of a second of cooking spray, that's 0.9 grams of fat. And because it's less than 1 gram, they can legally round it down to 0. So they can legally say this is 100% fat-free because it's less than 1 gram of fat, but only if you use a 1/4 of a second of spray. So that's just an example of how you can be misled by the front of the bottle, the front of the package, 100% fat free, but it's 100% fat. And so that's just some of the challenges we're up against out there in the food industry. So so I wanted to mention that, and then a few other things on the serving sizes. It's much smaller than what you normally would eat, a quarter of a cookie, half of a chocolate bar. So it makes it look better when they do that. And then the other thing they do a lot is when they say, oh, something's, light or fat or reduced fat or something like that, what they actually do so that it doesn't necessarily taste any worse, the product, they add sugar. So if they add sugar, they can keep just as much fat in as it was in it before, but because they added a bunch of sugar, less percentage of the calories are now fat than they were before. But that's just because they added a bunch of calories from added sugar. So that's just another trick that the food industry will do to make something appear healthier, reduced fat, things like that. So you guys remember like the Snackwell cookies back in the 1980s and 1990s? So those were fat, low fat cookies. And so they just added tons and tons of sugar to those so they would be lower in fat. So that was another trick that they used. And then and some of the rest of the stuff on here, there's 13 definitions here, and you guys can read through these later. It's just like, what do these things mean? What's light mean? What's multigrain, natural, organic, no added sugar, low calorie, low fat, low carb, made with whole grain, fortified or enriched, gluten-free, fruit flavored. The trans fat, we won't be seeing that much anymore. You shouldn't see that at all anymore because trans fats have been eliminated from the food supply because they're illegal to use. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then also at the very end of this here is other names used for sugar. So it's not just as easy as sugar. There's all these different chemical names for sugar, which is ways that they can hide the fact they're adding more sugar in without being so obvious. And so it's again, this is just an example of it's starting to sound like a chemistry set, so you don't want it. So if it's got more than 5 ingredients, especially more than 3 that you don't recognize, or beyond the first 3 that you don't recognize, big long names, then you don't want it. So always choose whole foods whenever possible. So any questions about that particular handout before I move on, or about anything I said so far?
Scott, I never knew about that spray, the quarter second or whatever. That's thanks for sharing that. That's pretty tricky for sure. Pretty disgusting.
Yeah, it's legal. They're following the rules, so they're not breaking the law. It's just pretty misleading though.
Wow. Wow.
So here's so I'll move on to this. So here's what a food label looks like. And so these handouts I have here come from the UC Davis School of Nutrition at University of California, Davis. That's where I got these. I got these from a dietitian friend of mine. He uses them in his presentation, and they come from there. And then, so this was back in 2018. You can see the date down at the bottom right. And that was when they transitioned from this food label, which was the old food label, to this new one. So I don't really have to go over this one anymore because they're not using that one anymore. They're using this one. And this has some of the changes that they went from the old label to the new label. So we don't really have to go over those so much because this is all you're pretty much seeing at the store now. So some of the things that have changed that are good are the calories are larger. Again, the serving sizes are a little bit larger, more reasonable. So those are good things. They did take out the percent of calories from fat, which I'm going to go over here in a minute. That unfortunately wasn't such a good change because they say, well, that not all fats are bad fats, and so the percent of calories isn't necessarily important. But if you're trying to lose weight, the fat is important because whether it's healthy fat or unhealthy fat, the fat we eat is the fat we wear. So we want to keep our fat low. So we're going to go over all these other on this other handout I have. Go over kind of the things to pay attention to on the rest of the food label. But I just wanted them to be toggling back and forth between this one here and this one here. So this tab over here on the right, on this third handout, this is what we're going to be focusing on right here, all these tabs. And so we'll start with fat, since I just mentioned fat. And kind of a good rule of thumb is you want your percent of calories from fat per serving to be less than 20%. And so here's how we're going to figure that out, because it's a little bit more challenging on the new food label than it is on the old food label. And so here's the total fat in a serving right here, 8 grams. So whatever this is, it doesn't matter what this is, but the serving size is 2/3 of a cup. And there's 230 calories in this serving of 2/3 of a cup of whatever this is. And in that serving, that 230 calories, of that 2/3 of a cup, 8 grams are fat. So the only number you have to memorize now to figure out this 20% rule we're going to talk about is knowing that every gram of fat is 9 calories. So 9 calories per gram of fat. It's that way for everything. So protein is only 4 calories per gram, and carbohydrates are also 4 calories per gram. So you can see why eating a high-fat diet makes it hard to lose weight, because it's a lot of calories. So it's only 4 calories in a gram of protein and 4 calories in a gram of carbohydrate, but there's 9 calories in every gram of fat. And so, those are your 3 macronutrients. Those of you who attended the nutritional myths and other popular diets class I did, where I talked about all of that stuff. Those are your 3 macronutrients where we get our calories, or fat, protein, and carbohydrates. So 9 calories for every gram of fat. So all you got to do then is go, okay, 9 calories times 8 grams of fat. What's 9 times 8? 72, right? 72. So 72 grams or 72 calories are in this serving are fat. So all you got to do then to get your percentage is divide 72 divided by 230, and that comes out at 31.3%. So if you carry your decimal, so you all have calculators on our phones, right? So if you're at the grocery store, you would just go, okay, 8 grams of fat in a serving times 9 calories per gram, 72 calories from fat. So 72 divided by 230, and then you just have to carry that decimal, and you're at 31.3% fat. So that whatever this is then does not meet the 20% rule. Let me go back to here. The 20% rule. So you want to keep it under 20%. So whatever that is does not meet that. So here's a couple of examples of how this is helpful, and I'm using my own personal experience on this a few years ago now, almost 10 years ago now, actually. And so when I first started eating this way, actually even to this day, my wife and I don't really make our own spaghetti sauce. Just we've never been able to make a spaghetti sauce, marinara sauce that tastes very good to us. And so when I was first shopping at Fred Meyer, we shop at Fred Meyer for the most part. And I was looking around I learned these rules just like you guys are learning them. And I was like, okay, I need to find a good pasta sauce, a good tomato marinara. And I found a couple different ones. One was from Newman's brand, Paul Newman's brand marinara. And there's another one that actually the either President's Choice or the Kroger brand, basically. They were both pretty good, because I looked at the ingredients list, and yeah, they do have olive oil in them. So I was like, it has oil, but it's like, okay, but it's pretty far down the ingredients list. So it's not in the first 3 ingredients, wasn't even in the first 5 ingredients. So I'm thinking, and there wasn't too many more ingredients than that. And I thought, oh, okay, well, this good way to figure out if it's got too much oil in it or not is to do the 20% rule, because I know that oil is 100% fat. So how much does it have? And so when I do this math on the 2 different tomato sauces, marinara sauces at Fred Meyer, they came out at only 15% fat. So it's like, okay, so I'm not perfect either, and so that's one of the pasta sauces that we use. It does beat the 20% rule. So that's how it helped me. And then it also helped me. I was also going to Cafe Yum quite a bit early on. I don't go quite as much anymore. But when I was going to Cafe Yum, and I was getting the Yum sauce. You guys are familiar with the Yum sauce? And so they do sell bottles of the Yum sauce at the store. So I actually got a hold of a bottle of Yum sauce. I looked at its label, and guess what percent of calories are fat in the Yum sauce? It's 90% fat, 90. So it's basically almost all oil. And so I don't use the Yum sauce, or if you are going to use it, maybe use half of the amount, or I usually just say no no yum sauce, just add extra salsa, for example. So that's how you can use that 20% rule to figure out if something is, got too much of anything, too much oil in it, basically. Because it's hard to, I mean, if you make your own sauce, you can keep it completely oil free, then you don't have to worry about it, which is what I'd recommend. But again, it's not about being perfect all the time. So sometimes you have to use these skills because you might be out somewhere, or you might have to buy something with a label sometimes. So any questions about the 20% rule? Does that make sense? Okay, and then the no trans fats, the next tab. You don't have we can pretty much ignore that now because there are no trans fats. Those are the worst types of fats. And if you were at that particular class, I talked about the nutritional myths and other popular diets. I go into more detail on that, but saturated fat, trans fat's the worst, saturated fat the next worst. But the only way you get trans fats anymore are from there are some natural trans fats in meat and dairy products, but other than that, trans fats are like hydrogenated oils, mayonnaise, things like that, Crisco, but they don't use those hydrogenated trans fats any longer because they're just so terrible as far as heart disease and things like that. Then also no cholesterol. So if you're looking at a label, it shouldn't have any cholesterol because then it comes from an animal, because there's no cholesterol in plants, and we have no nutritional requirement for cholesterol. So you want to make sure there's no cholesterol in it, because then that would mean there's animal product in it. And so then the next one is sodium. And this one's pretty easy. The sodium rule is you want it to be a 1-to-1 ratio. And so what that means is you want the number of milligrams of sodium to be the same or less than the number of calories per serving. And let me go back to this one. Let's practice that. Okay, so 1-to-1, you want it to be the sodium, which is right here, 160 milligrams in this container, or I can look at the new one, doesn't matter, it's the same. Sodium 160 milligrams, and the calories are 230. So that's actually pretty good, right? Because you want the sodium milligrams to be the same or less than the number of calories. So this is actually pretty good. This is less than 1-to-1. And so whatever this is pretty low in sodium. That meets the 1-to-1 rule. And the reason how this is helpful and how this 1-to-1 rule came about is the average person, if they look at the average calories eaten by men and women in this country and anywhere really, is about 2,300, 2,200, 2,300 calories a day. It's kind of an average for most people. And so if you think about, okay, so it just so happens to be that the recommended dietary allowance for sodium is about 2,200, 2,300 milligrams. And so so your calories and your sodium intake would be about the same at 1-to-1 ratio. Now, if you have heart failure, your heart disease, you're on a low sodium diet, most cardiologists, most dietitians will say, try to get down around 1,800 milligrams a day. So a little bit less for people that, again, with heart failure and whatnot. So, but for the average person, about 2,300 milligrams. So that's where the 1-to-1 rule comes in. And here's an example. I'll give you a really kind of an obvious example. If you go to the store and you look at Campbell's chicken noodle soup, which is going to be really high in sodium, right? No surprise there. It's about, I think I recall it was 70 calories per serving for Campbell's chicken noodle soup, but over 900 milligrams of sodium in that one serving. So that's about a 13-to-1 ratio. So you want the 1-to-1 ratio. So it shows you how extreme that can be, right? And so when you're looking at a label, you want to make sure whatever it is, the calories and the sodium are about the same. So the 1-to-1 rule. Any questions about that?
Scott, I had a comment just as a former math teacher on the fat percentages. It's much easier to figure out 20% of the calories first. Like you had 230 calories. If you just move the decimal point over 1, you get 10%. So 23. Double it, 46. So you know that your fat has to be 46 or under.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks I'm definitely no mathematician, so thank you. But Yeah, so either that probably does, that sounds much easier. So yeah, try to keep it under 20%. Because in general, a whole food plant-based diet, even if you're eating it, no processed foods whatsoever, all whole plant foods, the way Charlie and I teach, you're probably getting 10 to 15% of your calories still from fat. So, because every food has fat, broccoli has fat, cauliflower has fat, potatoes have fat, every food has fat. There's no such thing as a no fat diet. So even eating all whole plant foods, you're still getting 10 to 15%. But, if you're gonna have a few packaged foods or like the tomato sauce I use, whatever, it's gonna, it's gonna have a little oil in it. You want to make sure it's not very much, so less than 20%. Yeah, thanks for that. So you guys got the sodium rule down okay? All right, well, the next tab is carbohydrates. So you look for, it's hard to read here. It says carbohydrates, look for whole grain. And so you want the word whole. So when you're looking at the ingredients list, you want it to say whole, whole grain, 100% whole wheat. You want that word whole in there. And that segues into the fiber rule pretty well. And so just all you have to remember with the whole grain rule is just getting that word whole in there. And that's usually a pretty good sign. Another good sign that it's probably a good whole grain and not a refined grain is if there's at least 2 to 3 grams of fiber per serving. And we're going to go over that. We're going to go over the 5-to-1 rule here in a little bit too. And then I'm going to show a Dr. Greger video when I'm done with these handouts about that, reinforcing that 5-to-1 rule. But so 2 to 3 grams of fiber per serving. So let's go back to our label here. And so again, 2/3 of a cup is our serving size. And then you go down here to fiber, it's got 4 grams. So 4 grams in a serving is in this. So that's more than 2 to 3. So that's a pretty good sign. Likely it's going to have a whole grain in it. And so that's, again, a good sign, unless they sometimes they'll still put in refined grains, and then they'll put in a fiber additive, a fiber supplement to it, which as you learned from Charlie and I, isn't as healthy. A fiber, adding fiber in as a supplement is not as healthy for your body as eating the fiber from the whole plant food. So you have to watch out for that a little bit. It's sometimes hard to tell if they've done that or not, but in general, if it's got 2 or 3 grams of fiber per serving or more, this one's got 4, that's a pretty good sign. And then we're going to talk about the 5-to-1 rule here. And with the 5-to-1 rule, what you want to look at is the total carbohydrates divided, and our mathematician can help here too, the total number of carbohydrates in a serving and the grams of fiber. You want the grams of carbohydrate to be no more than 5 times the number of grams of fiber. So 5-to-1. So this is about 7. This is about that would be about 8. Actually 9. That'd be about 9. This would be a 9-to-1, because 37 divided by 4. So that goes 9 times, right? 9 times 4, 36. So 37. So a 9-to-1 ratio. So you want it to be ideally 5-to-1 ratio, which it's hard to find things that are processed that meet the 5-to-1 rule. I'll give you a few examples of things that are, like Uncle Sam's cereal, I believe, is 5-to-1. That's one that comes to mind. Another one is for bread. Ezekiel bread, I believe, meets the 5-to-1 rule. So it is challenging. Like things like grape nuts are about 7-to-1. I think mini wheats, like shredded wheat, I think is about 7-to-1, which isn't too terribly bad, but it's still not meeting the 5-to-1, which is kind of your ideal. And remember, this only actually applies to processed food. So, because if you were to look at a food label on beans or oats or something like that, it's not going to look. It's going to look like, well, that's not even 5-to-1. How come that? Sometimes you'll see that it's not necessarily 5-to-1, but we're only talking about foods that have been processed that counts, because you're eating a whole food, a whole grain. It just has quite a bit of carbohydrate, but still has plenty of fiber too, and its effect on the body, as you learn in these classes, is completely different. So a lima bean is going to be totally different effect in your body than a jelly bean, right? So they both have lots of carbohydrate, but one is a whole food that's going to break down slowly. It's going to has all the nutrients, the fiber, the water, the vitamins, the minerals, the protein, everything your body needs right in that wonderful package. Whereas the jelly beans just mostly sugar, right? So it has no nutrient value. So you have to remember that this 5-to-1 rule for fiber and looking at the grams of fiber, that's applying to processed food. So because it's just kind of helping you determine if I'm going to eat this processed food, you're trying not to as much as you can, but how can I figure out what's going to be the best for me out of all these different processed foods I might choose? So I'm trying to help you keep it in context here. So any questions about the 5-to-1 rule? And again, I'll show a video with Dr. Greger that'll explain it as well. Again,
My hand's up.
hey Ken, yeah.
I never heard of that cereal, Uncle Who's.
Uncle Sam, SAM. Yeah, I've seen it. I think I've seen it at Fred Meyer, Trader Joe's. I've never tried it myself, but because I eat oats, but I don't eat any boxed cereals myself. But
I haven't had any in like a year, but I really want it.
oh yeah, so I mean that would be one of the better ones if you're gonna eat that. And then if you put lots of fruit on it and just do your oat milk or soy milk or one of your nut milks, especially, or if you're somebody that's maybe even trying to gain a few pounds, or you're not too worried about the calorie density, it's certainly a much healthier choice than bacon and eggs and sausage, right?
Well, I never eat that stuff. My main breakfast is beans and spinach or kale or collards.
Great. Any other questions about the fiber rule?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
I thought the 5-to-1 rule was Dr. Greger's advice for eating bread.
What's for fiber rule for any food, really, any processed food, you want to try to make sure it meets the 5-to-1 rule. That's just ideal, but you won't, as I mentioned, you won't really find too many processed foods that meet that standard.
Right.
As close as you can.
Again, just with the math, it's easier for people to multiply than divide. So just take your fiber, multiply by 5. If that isn't enough, try multiplying by 6, 7, 8, until you get close. And then you know the ratio.
Perfect. Let's practice it right here. So whatever this is 6 grams of fiber and 43 grams of carbohydrate. Oh, I guess that's one we did already. 6 times, no, let's see, 6 times 6, 6 times 7, 40. So that is a different one. So if you take 6, I guess, times 5, that would be 30. So it's not the 5-to-1 rule because it's 30's, 43 is more carbohydrate than 30. So it doesn't meet the 5-to-1 rule, but you can also go, okay, 6 times 7, 42. So it's about a 7-to-1 ratio, whatever this is. So that would be kind of like similar to grape nuts and some of the other cereals I've seen out there. But like another example would be like Cheerios or something, whole grain Cheerios. I think the one that doesn't have any sugar added, I think it's like also 7-to-1 or 8-to-1 or 9-to-1, something like that. But then you go do like Honey Nut Cheerios and it's like goes all the way up to like 20-to-1 or something. So it's really bad. Not much fiber. It's because of all the added sugar is why that happens. All that sugar is just carbohydrate with no fiber. So it's been stripped of all of its nutrients, basically. And then, yeah, and that's a good segue into avoid added sugar. And then we already talked about oil, no added oil. Of course, you can still default to that 20% rule, like I mentioned earlier. But let's go back to the label. And so one of the things that actually was a win with the transition to the newer label from the old label, they didn't used to have to put added sugar. They could just put natural sugar and sugar's 12. But now they actually do total sugar's 12, includes 10 grams of added sugar. And so that's a win because they didn't have to disclose that before. So now they have to say when they've added sugar to something, they have to write that down there. But you can also see that in your ingredients list. And if you go through that article with all the names for sugar, you can kind of oh, you see all these different sugars they added to it. Look at all this, and even things that don't say sugar, things that are just other names for sugar, dextrose and maltose and all these other things. And then sugar alcohols that they do in the low carb types of foods, they add a lot of sugar alcohols, which don't add calories, but can give you diarrhea. But yeah, those are all just added sugars as well, sugar alcohols too. So that's the main things I wanted to show on the handouts. Can read through those. Any questions before I show Dr. Greger's video? Does anyone have any questions about anything we went over?
Yeah, am I still unmuted?
Yeah.
So I've really been looking at those labels. Boy, there's a lot of artificial sweeteners, and I know they're all something to stay away from and unhealthy. Then you've got a whole bunch of new sweeteners now that are the product of fermentation. Now, I've been avoiding those too, but are they a healthier choice? So those are the ones that all end with the sol, S-O-L is at the end.
Yeah, those are the sugar alcohols with the LOLs at the end.
Fermentation. Are they a healthier choice than like your erythritol, aspartame? Oh
Yeah.
man, saccharin, they still use that.
Right. Yeah. So none of them are healthy. I mean, there's some that are better than others. I mean, you talk about stevia and some of the other ones, but what we're learning more and more, we used to think, oh, they don't really spike blood sugar or insulin levels, but newer studies are showing that they do. And then there's also a lot of new evidence coming out that they affect the gut microbiome in a negative way. So overall, I don't think we can really say that any of them are any better, than anything else. So it's best to just avoid them as we can.
Be for the ones that end with sol, S-O-L. I see that a lot. And that leads me right into stevia. And we've talked about stevia, and because it's got to be mixed with maltose or something to make it palatable, Charlie has advised us against it because that's processing. I'm really attracted to the idea of stevia, but the thing that bothers me is all the labels in the stevia packages say zero calories, but
Right.
I believe they all have to have a carrier that's probably some sort of sugar. So how do they get away with saying there's low calories when they'll even put on the label that it's got maltose in it, but they still say it's got 0 calories. How do they get away with that?
Well, again, I know the sugar alcohols don't have any calories. That's my level of knowledge on that, but they still have effects in the body in a negative way. I think even 5-10 years ago we didn't think they did. And the more we learn, the more we realize, they aren't such a good thing. We should probably try to avoid them. And that's the other thing with even things like honey. Even though honey is natural, and people say, well, that's probably fine, but it's still hyper palatable. It still hits the dopamine receptor. If you're eating a lot of artificial sweeteners or regular or real sweeteners or honey, then fruit's not going to taste very, very sweet or very satisfying. So, ultimately you want to get to where you're just eating whole foods that are unprocessed. And even though honey is not necessarily a processed food because it's made by bees, is that think about in nature, if you're a hunter or gatherer and you occasionally came across a beehive and you got some honey and you're a hunter or gatherer, then you're going to eat it because it's tons of calories. It's going to make you feel good. But that's a survival mechanism, but it's not something you're going to be eating every day, because it's just something you come across rarely. And that's the problem, is everything that's high in sugar, salt, fat, hyper palatable like that is very addicting. And that's what we get at the supermarket. And every day, if we're just hitting ourselves with that constantly, then eating whole plant foods aren't going to be very satisfying. Eating a ripe peach isn't going to taste very, very sweet when you're used to eating Fruit Loops, right? Or lots of
You said that bee, honey's not processed. The bees process it an average of 7 times.
Oh, wow.
They
Yeah,
have a crop.
I mean like a factory, right? Something you.
Yeah, well, it's still processed. They have a crop like a bird.
Oh,
So
yeah.
regurgitate it up, average of 7 times. Think
wow.
about that before you think it's healthy.
Oh, boy. Yeah. I just mentioned it because it's, out in nature, right? Not produced by
I
a,
love this stuff, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
awfully sweet.
yeah.
I was, before I got on this whole food diet, I would eat a whole bag of gummy bears, and then I would crash, like a half an hour later, I would just totally crash.
Let me play the Dr. Greger video here for the 5 to 1. And then the rest of the time we have for questions. Okay.
When people think fiber, they think constipation. And it's true, if we could get Americans just to eat the minimum recommended daily intake of fiber containing foods, we could save our country $80 billion. And that's just from the effects on constipation alone. Accumulating evidence indicates that greater dietary fiber intakes reduce risk for diabetes, heart disease, certain cancers, weight gain, obesity, diverticular disease, as well as constipation. So we need to eat more fiber-rich foods, which means eating more whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils. As fiber intake goes up, the risk of metabolic syndrome appears to go down. Less inflammation and an apparent stepwise drop in obesity risk. And so, no surprise, perhaps, that greater dietary fiber intake is associated with a lower risk of heart disease, 9% lower risk for every additional 7 grams a day of total fiber consumed. That's just like some rice and beans or a few servings of fruits and vegetables. How does fiber do its magic? What are the mechanisms by which dietary fiber may extend our lifespan? Helps get rid of excess bile, feeds our good bacteria, changes our gut hormones, which collectively helps control our cholesterol and body weight, blood sugar, and blood pressure, which reduces the risk for cardiovascular disease. Reducing inflammation is a whole nother mechanism by which fiber may help prevent chronic disease. The accompanying editorial to the fiber and heart disease meta-analysis implored doctors to enthusiastically and skillfully recommend that patients consume more dietary fiber. That means a lot of whole plant foods. If, however, we do buy something packaged, the first word in the ingredients list should be whole, but then the rest of the ingredients could be junk. So a second strategy is to look at the ratio of grams of carbohydrates to grams of dietary fiber. We're looking for a 5 to 1 or less. So, for example, whole wheat Wonder Bread passes the first test, first word is whole, but then it's like corn syrup in a chemistry set. Let's see if it passes the 5 to 1 rule. What you do is divide the carbohydrates by the dietary fiber. 20 divided by 2.7 is about 7. That's more than 5, so it goes back on the shelf. Better than white, though, which clocks in at over 18. Now, here's one that makes the cut. 15 divided by 3 equals 5. Can do the same thing with breakfast cereal. Multi-grain Cheerio sounds healthy, but has a ratio over 7. And then it just goes downhill from there. Here's an example of one that does make the cut, though sliding in under 4. The editorial concluded, the recommendation to consume diets with adequate amounts of dietary fiber may turn out to be the most important nutritional recommendation of all.
Which one was 4?
The Uncle Sam cereal.
Is that what he said? I just missed what he said just now.
That was the last.
Ezekiel bread had 5 and something came in at 4.
That was the Uncle Sam cereal.
Uncle Sam.
I didn't hear him say that.
Just rewatch, just replay it if you want to watch it.
Too much running chainsaw, sorry.
Okay. All right, anyone, questions, any questions,
Yeah.
discussion? Yeah,
So I haven't looked this up and I should look it up and Charlie said we should eat the peelings. You know, it's like eating sandpaper, but eat the peelings of the kiwis. Is that like supercharged fiber? Because I want it to really be worth it to eat that stuff.
I've
So
never,
you think
Well,
there's-
Ken, I don't actually eat the peelings of the kiwi. My grandkids did. But I don't think it's unhealthy. But I just wanted to clarify that.
Man,
I do. I eat the outside of the kiwi and it's fine.
well,
Okay, there you go.
I eat it, but it reminds me of a cat's tongue.
so I'll test.
Okay,
you guys.
well,
I'll test
you know,
I'll test you guys. What was the #1 rule of food label reading? What was #1?
Serving size.
If it has a label, don't eat it.
There you go. That's the one.
Scott, I wanted to ask you about, I have something in my memory about the whole wheat versus 100% whole wheat and which is better. I mean, do you have any information about that 100% versus whole?
I think if it says whole wheat 100%, then it would be just wheat. Whereas sometimes if it says whole grain or whole, then it's multiple grains. But I think there's not much. I think whole and 100% are supposed to be equivocal, as far as what I understand from it.
is that equivocal or equivalent?
Equivalent. Yeah, sorry, equivalent.
Okay.
Yeah. But
That's okay.
But all you gotta do is look at the no, if it's got at least 2 or 3 grams of fiber in a serving, it's likely 100% or whole grain, because that's about what you think about a half cup serving of grain like quinoa or oats or anything like that. It's about 3 to 4 grams of fiber in a half cup serving of cooked grains. So it's so that's usually about what a serving size is, what it would be on a package too. So that would be pretty close.
So remember, for those of you who are trying to lose weight, that even if a product says 100% whole wheat, but they take the whole wheat, the grain, and they chop it up finely, it becomes a flour and it gets absorbed very rapidly, and you actually have more calories from that and less food for your microbiome. So if you're looking for the healthiest choice, you buy the whole wheat as it comes in the cereal grain, and you make yourself whole wheat cereal as opposed to eating the bread. Just a thought. I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm just saying if you're not getting the weight loss benefits that you want, maybe you'll take that into consideration. Scott has made a point of the calorie density is higher by chopping it up.
Right. Just for example, a wheat berry, which is what grows in the field, that would be about 500 calories per pound, whereas bread is 1,200 calories per pound. So more than twice the calorie density, because just for that exact reason that Charlie discussed there.
So I'm confused. The 5-to-1 ratio, is it lower than that is good, or do you want it higher than 5-to-1?
You want it lower, so 5-to-1 or less, because you want
Okay.
there to be lots of fiber in something, and so as compared to the carbohydrate, because basically the more carbohydrate and the less fiber, the more processed it is, and the less like its whole plant food that it started as, it becomes. So if you take a whole grain and then you strip it of its outer shell and you mill it and you create it into something processed, you have a lot more carbohydrate, a lot less fiber, because you've just refined it. So it's like flour versus a grain, a whole grain that grows in a field, for example. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Dolly here.
Yeah.
Yes, Dolly.
And I've gotten almost all the cookbooks that are on the list for resources. And we do like an occasional muffin. And so I found a few recipes in the cookbook for muffins. They'll say like pure cane sugar, but I'm a diabetic, so I use the stevia. And now I'm thinking I shouldn't be doing that at all.
You could use date sugar. You could use molasses. That's what Gregor recommends. As opposed to I don't know, I haven't seen a head-to-head study of stevia versus molasses or date sweetener, but date is a whole food, and it's seems like a reasonable choice. That's what we sweeten smoothies with. So using that to sweeten a muffin.
Well, thanks. Okay. That I have to think about now.
Okay.
I use a recipe that's on the website, and it's for pumpkin muffins, and the sweetener is just dates. You put them in the food processor and chop them up, and it makes them really sweet. I like that.
Thank you,
Great.
honey. Thanks.
I'd like to comment on something.
Okay. Go ahead, Eddie.
The whole issue of trickiness on labeling and I don't know, kind of the ethics of that. In business, it's true that a lot of what they do is based on costs. They're trying to make a profit, of course. But it's hard. Like many things that are worthwhile, cooking healthy is more work. And I want to give an example of the place where I volunteer one afternoon a week, helping to cook. I'm not going to name them because I don't want them to get on my case, but in general, this is a nonprofit that is very conscientious. They are environmentally aware. They try to serve nutritious, healthy meals in general and not waste and restrict their water use, on and on and on. But they use processed flour, they use sugar, oil, animal products, because not doing so it's going to take a whole lot more labor than they've got. They rely on us few volunteers to get all these meals prepared every week and then delivered to cancer patients. They just couldn't do it if they had to make everything as healthy as possible, I don't think. I don't want to be a corporate apologist here, but there's an awful lot that goes into labeling and what the motivations are. Another thing that companies do has to do with palatability, the mouthfeel, the texture. They have engineers who work on nothing but that because they want to sell the product.
And what has that led to in our culture? The making it more palatable, making it more attractive and tasty. What's the side effects been?
Worse health.
Yeah, so when you say that they're trying to serve healthy food, they're trying to serve healthy food under a paradigm that we can only use foods that are supplied by our culture. We have to think outside the box and actually provide healthy foods if we're going to get the health we desire for our population. And it's sort of like climate change. We've been talking about it a long time, hasn't had much action until the last few years, where there are a bunch of new technological innovations that are on the forefront. Haven't quite made it yet, but people are thinking, what are we going to do to stop the planet from warming up? And hopefully we get that same mindset about what are we going to do to get the food choices that are actually healthy. Just like we stopped smoking, for years, doctors used to smoke. Doctors at times told their patients, this could relax you, go ahead and smoke. Until there were 7,000 studies, or 6 or 7, that actually showed it caused disease, and we're finding the same about food. So I know the volunteer organization that's trying to feed people is trying their utmost to do what they think is right, but they're using a paradigm which has led to obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and other issues. And if they understood the science, they would shift to less expensive foods: beans, rice, lentils, potatoes, quinoa, soy. They could provide those for people, and it wouldn't be the food preparation there, a problem with that. Just my thought.
You're right. You don't have to sell me, but as I look at what they do in there, it just seems like they have a long way to go to get over the hump towards better health.
Well, let us talk to the leadership, get us hooked up to whoever are the leaders and say, hey, would you be interested in talking to some weird guys who are actually promoting reversing diabetes and, reducing obesity, and, have a little discussion about what might be done to reduce the cost of your food and
I
to
can do
improve the
that.
health. We'd be more than willing to sit down or Zoom with them, and we'd love to do that.
Okay.
Eddie,
Yeah.
ask you a question. Are you volunteering at that community kitchen that uses Hummingbird Wholesale?
Like I
it a-
said before, I'm not going to name them because I don't want them to get on my case, but
I just wondered if there were more than that because I'm a cancer patient. So I can ask them. I talk to them once in a while.
By the way, I buy things from Hummingbird Wholesale if they get a lot of their food from there. And I buy a number of beans and rice and other kinds of things from them. So they have healthy choices.
Now I pulled up this book because Eddie was talking about, the mouthfeel and how they try to make the process as addicting as possible with manipulating the mouthfeel, the amount of salt, sugar, and fat. This is a really good book to read, Michael Moss, Salt, Sugar, and Fat. That's a really good one if you're interested in that concept of how they're getting us hooked on all these highly palatable, super palatable foods. It's all revealed here in that book. It's really good.
somebody asked the question, how did I get away with something or other in labeling a little while ago? One of the worst examples I've ever heard of is the use of the term wild caught when it comes to fish like salmon.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that if they use a corral with like an underwater fence out into the sea, they can call them wild caught as long they have to have a certain amount of water per fish on average. But that's anything but that's farming. That's just fish farming.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's an absolute environmental disaster. I love chili, and there's thousands of them down in Patagonia.
And watch Seaspiracy if you haven't watched that documentary about the fishing industry. Seaspiracy, made by the same maker as Cowspiracy. Seaspiracy, SEA. Yeah, it's on Netflix.
if you haven't watched it, I second the motion. It's worth watching. I've watched it myself. It's very good.
Other questions? Next week, Charlie's gonna talk about Alzheimer's and dementia is our topic next week.
What was the name of that movie you just mentioned on Netflix? The
Seaspiracy.
Seaspiracy.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There's lots of good ones too. Forks Over Knives, if you haven't seen that, that one's on YouTube. It's not on Netflix anymore. That's a good one. The Game Changers is still on Netflix. That's another really good one. If you haven't seen that. If you want to just develop an aversion to eating animal products, you can watch, Seaspiracy, Cowspiracy, Food Inc. There's a bunch of them like that. They're pretty shocking how bad animals are treated and how bad it is for the environment and everything. Whatever you
I
need.
have another question related to labeling. It's on the organic.
Uh-huh.
I just really wonder how much that protects us from. I know we hope that it keeps insecticides from being sprayed on the food that are so labeled, but I just read a thing today. I subscribe to this organization called Center for Food Safety.
Mhm.
And they're generally pretty good, pretty down to earth. I thought they don't beat you over the head asking for money, but boy, they used a sensationalist headline title on this one. They say Nazi chemical weapons on our food. And they talk about how just because earlier this year, a certain chemical, an organophosphate, was banned, that's no great reason for celebration, because there are 12 others that can still be legally sprayed onto leafy greens and berries in particular.
Yeah, so eating sprays, chemical sprays, doesn't sound great, but for those people who can't afford to purchase organically grown produce, Dr. Greger has reviewed the literature and he said the benefits outweigh the risks, in his opinion. And he's been reviewing every article on nutrition around the world in English for over 10 years now. So I've come to trust his judgment. And so I advise people that even though you're buying conventional sprayed fruit and vegetables, it's healthier than not eating them at all. Now, if you want your best benefit, the least amount of potential damage or the most damage might be occurring in young children, maybe pregnant women. For those of us who are older, past our 60s or 70s, probably going to be minimal damage in comparison. So that's my thoughts.
There's lists of the worst, the things with the worst of it. So like the Dirty Dozen, when I didn't have enough money, I was careful to get organic for like most of the Dirty Dozen, but then I didn't worry about some of the other things.
It's a good thought. You can do a Google search for the Dirty Dozen or the Clean 15, I think it is.
Yeah.
One of the participants, Kim, recommended we think about the vegan cruise in the Caribbean that's coming about next March 17th through the 24th, 2023. For those of you bold enough to travel and who have money to spend on it, they're going to have Greger and Clapper and, the Scherzais, the neurologists, and a good group of people who are going to be speakers. And we're not going, I don't think, for the expense of it all. But for those of you who really want to get inspired and want to go on a cruise, if you dare do that in this world, Ocean Robbins was advertising that.
When is it?
It's in March. Bernard is going to be there to March 17 through the 24th. And it's in the Caribbean. And it's Bernard, Gregor, Columbus, Batista, Clapper, Scherzais, and on the story goes. It's quite a impressive group, assuming that COVID and monkeypox and God knows what else comes around by that time. It's kind of hard to plan for things in our thought process right now. But
Right. Yeah, that brings me to this time next week. I'll be in Washington, DC. It'll be 10 o'clock at night when class starts. So I'll try to chime in. I'll try to show up and hang with you guys for a little bit next week. You'll be covering Alzheimer's and dementia, but it'll be still 7 p.m. my time or time here because it's the first day we get there. But I'm there for the PCRM, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine Plant-Based Nutrition Conference. So I'll see Neil Barnard, and I know Ornish is there, and all the heavy hitters will be there. So I'm looking forward to that coming up a week from today. So.
And you can tell us about that the week you get back.
Yeah, sounds good.
That's great. So we have been having fun. We have time for, another question or two or three, depending on what the group wants or has an interest in.
Can't record it.
What's that?
Record. Can we record next week? Probably not.
Yeah,
If
we'll record.
Scott's gone, will it record?
Yeah,
next
it'll
week?
record because I'm the guy who does the recorder from the Zoom link from the medical school. So it'll be recorded. I just have to stay home to keep recording these meetings. That's the solution.
Yeah.
Or be in a time zone that works.
Or take us all with you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a possibility too.
Oh,
So
asking, what's the name of the Bahamas cruise in March? Is there a name for it?
yeah, let's see. It's called the Caribbean Cruise Holistic Holiday at Sea. Holistic Holiday at Sea. Caribbean Cruise, the original vegan cruise. Huh.
Yeah, Dr. McDougall used to do cruises all the time back in the old days, but it doesn't anymore. Those would have been fun because you're on it's all whole food plant-based meals served to you, which is what I get at these conferences I go to. That's one of the bonuses of these nutrition conferences I go to. I get continuing education, my work pays for it, and I get fed plant-based meals. So the triple whammy.
So it's the cruise ship is the MSC Divina, Divina, whoever that's with.
Someone's asking about my conference. I have it on the Eugene Plant-Based Providers website. Let me go that real quick. If I can go to it from our link to it from our class website. So if you go down here to Eugene Plant-Based Providers, have upcoming events. Click on that. Here's what I'm going to next week. International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine, August 18th to the 20th. That's in Washington, DC. And then, of course, here's our next walk, August 27th. We got that up there. And then I'm getting to go to this other conference too. That one's in Palm Springs in September. I've been to this one several times, but it has everyone all the people from there's Dr. Gregor, Dr. Clapper, Dean Ornish. There's a whole bunch of good ones.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's good.
Going to that one as well. And actually, Eric's going to this one too. Yeah, you can Look at those.
Well, anybody else? Any questions? Any thoughts?
How do you get the Eugene plant-based providers? Is that,
Yeah, so are you on the, have you signed up for the newsletter for these classes?
I don't know.
Okay,
I
yes,
just got on the Zoom.
okay, yes, let me go back again. And, yeah, I should, show you that real quick. So if you go to here's the homepage. So if you just go to, livelifestylemedicine.com, that's
Mhm.
this address. And if do you have one of the class flyers?
Yes.
Yeah, so that web address is on there, livelifestylemedicine.com. So you come to
Yes.
the homepage, and then what I'd recommend you do is either click here or click here, subscribe to the weekly class newsletter, either one works, and put in your email and your first and last name, and then you'll get a welcome newsletter that has all kinds of information in it. It also has links to the Facebook group, links to the Eugene Plant-Based Providers, which you can also get to right here on the homepage. You can either click here or here, and that takes you to the Eugene Plant-Based Provider website, and that's our kind of partners. It's all plant-based providers in Eugene. We have cardiologists and surgeons, and Charlie and Eric and I, and we have 3 dietitians and a physical therapist and pediatrician. We have a whole wide array of medical professionals. And we have a monthly meeting, and we're planning all these different events that are free. And so I was kind of showing that you go to the upcoming events on the Plant-Based Providers website. That's some of the upcoming events. So there's the community walk on the 27th. We're doing one of those every month. We had a potluck at the end of June. We're going to have a booth at the Eugene Health and Wellness Expo in October, which is here. You can view the details there. We've done grocery store shopping tours with dietitians, and all this stuff is free. So, yeah, join the newsletter. You can also get a newsletter on this group. We also put out a newsletter every month, and you can sign up for that here. Join the newsletter. It also has this class. So if you're already getting the newsletter for the classes every Sunday, for these classes, you don't need to sign up here. This is the same thing, but you could get the newsletter that we put out every month. And if you scroll down, we have all the archived newsletters here. We just put one out just last week. And then here's the ones we started the group. We started a newsletter in February. So there's all the past newsletters you can read. It has really good information, good inspiring stories of some of the members and some of the people that have gotten benefit from the diet change. All kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you so much for the invite, and I will definitely engage. This is more than the diabetes classes I've been to.
Oh,
So
great.
thanks a lot.
You're welcome. We're here for you as long as you need us. So you can come every
Thank you.
week or however often you want.
Thank you.
The chat room, I can't seem to get to, Scott. There's 6 messages in there, and
Yeah, I've looked at them all. Yeah, it's fine. I was just responding. Someone had asked about what conference I was talking about, so that's why I went back to the
okay.
website there.
And Linda, if you get stuck or anybody gets stuck and they want some extra help, send an email to us and we'll hook you up with the med student, or I'll talk with you directly for a bit. Whatever help you need, don't sit there and say, I wish I knew.
Then also on the homepage of the class website, I have a little 10-minute tutorial recorded there. So if you just click on that, I kind of give you a tour of what's all available on the website and how to get to it and all that.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right.
Scott, thank you a bunch. And Lisa, thanks for your input, and thanks for the input from everybody else. The testimonials and the questions. That's what we look forward to every week. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Yes.
Alzheimer's and dementia is the topic next week.
I'll probably
Good night,
forget.
everybody.
I
Have a
forget.
good
Good
week.
night.
I
Thanks.
will.
Good
But I'll-
night.
Thanks for
I'll
sharing.
remember at the last minute. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for
Bye-bye.
listening.
Bye.